Hi, this is Mark Birch, and this is a quick revision of Macbeth Act 3, Scene 1. The scene begins with Banquo illustrating his suspicions regarding Macbeth. "I fear thou playedst most foully for it." You can hear through those fricatives as well that sense of concern as it's hammered home through each of those powerful first sounds. Banquo notes that the prophecy didn't suggest that Macbeth's line would inherit the crown, but that his would. And that foreshadows Macbeth's fears about Banquo that appear later on in this scene. After a few moments of duplicitous banter with Banquo, Macbeth moves into a soliloquy that's a significant contrast to the soliloquies already received in Act 1, Scene 7 and Act 2, Scene 1. Those soliloquies were dominated by his doubts and his guilt, his uncertainty about committing the murder, and yet this one's characterised by certainty and anger. So we can see that Macbeth's changed. At the end of Act 2, Scene 1, he recognised in his soliloquy the dangers of procrastination, and all of that procrastination has disappeared here. He has been persuaded to kill the king by his wife, despite the kind of doubts that he evidenced in those first two soliloquies, but he doesn't share the conclusion of this soliloquy with his wife, instead telling her in Act 3, Scene 2, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck." This is his plan. He's working alone and he's not being influenced by anyone, although you could argue, of course, that the witches still have a part in fueling this ambition in the first place. If we take a look at some of the specifics of the soliloquy, one of the things that's interesting is Macbeth's use of "to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus." And what we have here is a form of chiasmus. You've got that reversal of the grammar in the second clause. And because you've got that inversion, that kind of turning around, it could symbolise the inversion of Macbeth's goals. Previously his goal was to become king, but now he's recognising that to become king is kind of pointless unless the crown is secure, unless he manages to have a crown that won't be usurped by Banquo or passed on to Banquo's kids. Macbeth goes on to outline his fears in Banquo, and one of the things that's interesting about this is that those fears are synonymous with the virtues of Banquo. These are the things that he sees as potential obstacles for him. He says that Banquo has a royalty of nature. That could be interpreted two ways. One, that he's noble and royal in that sense, but also, of course, he's been proclaimed by the witches to be the ancestor of kings. He also says that he has a dauntless temper of his mind, a fearless quality, as well as a wisdom that doth guide his valour, which could be seen as quite ironic given that in the conclusion of the play, one of the things that characterises Macbeth is that he lacks wisdom. His valour is reckless and wild. Shakespeare then gives us a lovely little classical allusion. "Under him my genius is rebuked, as it is said Mark Antony's was by Caesar." What we have here is Macbeth presenting himself as Mark Antony and Banquo as Caesar. This works because Caesar defeated Antony in the civil wars, and Antony was warned that Caesar would ruin him by a soothsayer. What you've got, therefore, is a kind of supernatural foretelling, a supernatural warning, which parallels that of the witches to Macbeth about the dangers posed by Banquo. The fear of Banquo taking Macbeth's crown is evidenced again in the use of words from the semantic field of being childless. Both fruitless, barren and unlineal all convey the idea that Macbeth wouldn't have a successor, and they're conjoined with words like sceptre and crown, which are symbolic of kingship. The depth of Macbeth's perceived loss is evident in what follows. He says, "If it be so, for Banquos Issue have I defiled or polluted my mind. For them the gracious Duncan have I murdered." And it's worth noting that, again, Macbeth's using these positive epithets to describe Duncan, showing again the depth of his guilt. There are no euphemisms to describe what he did to Duncan. He murdered Duncan, the gracious Duncan. And therefore, we see that he's committed this terrible act for Banquo, for Banquo's issue. He's poured rancours into the vessel of my peace. Again, a metaphor for his own conscience. The cup, or the vessel of his mind, which was peaceful, has now been poisoned by those rancours. It's been filed. And it's only for them, for the successors of Banquo, that mine eternal jewel is given to the common enemy of man. That common enemy of man is the devil, and the eternal jewel symbolically the soul. And so essentially Macbeth is claiming that he's given up his eternal sanctuary in heaven in order to give something of value to Banquo's kids. Don't ever refer to them as kids, by the way. Use something like children or progeny. And when we go into the next section, rather than so come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance, Macbeth's calling on fate as a kind of champion that you would have in a tournament, in a battle, to fight him in a battle to the death. We've got this extended metaphor of the tournament that conveys the battle that Macbeth knows he's got to fight against the witches' prophecy of fate. The witches have said that his children are not going to be kings, and therefore he's got to tackle that fatalistic account of what's going to happen in the future. He's accepted some of their foretellings, but he wants to challenge those that he doesn't like and that don't support him. After the soliloquy, Macbeth meets the murderers that he intends to send out after Banquo. Macbeth aims to persuade them to do this by blaming Banquo for these men not receiving the rewards that they deserved, even though they thought it was the innocent Macbeth. This is Macbeth again, looking like the innocent flower but being the serpent under it. He's now the great deceiver and persuader. Macbeth maintains this role, previously held by his wife, in mirroring the kind of language that she used in Act 1, Scene 7. Just as she questioned his manhood, what beast was it then, when talking about his failure to act on his words about killing Duncan, so Macbeth questions the manhood of the murderers by comparing them to different types of dog. Macbeth's argument relies on the fact that there are different types of dog, just as there are different types of men. Some are valued and some are despised. So in other words, he's suggesting that the murderers could be demi-wolves or they could be greyhounds. And obviously he's suggesting that to be greyhounds, they would have to go through with the noble act of murdering this person who slighted them. When the murderers are sent to carry out the murder, Macbeth's words mirror those of Lady Macbeth in terms of the kind of planning that she expresses in Act 1, Scene 7. Just as he had finally agreed to commit the murder, and she then revealed the nature of the plans that she was going to put into place in order for Duncan to be dispatched. Okay, ta.